Chapter 2. Ruth. They said when you lived outside, your body adapted. It grew tough. You grew tough. The streets were cold even in the summer. It came into your bones and never left. Some said your only way to survive was to fight. It had been a hard lesson for Ruth, one she never succeeded in learning, but she was careful. She knew how to disappear, to hide in plain sight. It was what kept her alive, her lack of threat. But her survival was more than that. Many of those she shared the street with owed her their lives. She'd performed CPR on several drug addicts that slept in the same alleys she did, or those so drunk they neglected to cover up on the coldest nights, when frost would have taken their lives. She had wrapped them up, kept them from death's grip. These acts did not go unnoticed. But there were always those she could not save, those she could not help. She had seen too many tragedies, too many promising lives lost for nothing, to let hers be wasted. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice told her that eventually her time would come. How and when, she did not know. When her uncle Obadiah found her, there was that voice in her head, quietly whispering, "This is it. This is your time." It wasn't exactly right, but it took her from the streets. Obadiah, she quickly realized, was not a kind man. For that, she was grateful. It meant she always had to keep her guard up, not let herself become too soft, not let herself be destroyed by misplaced kindness. Obadiah brought her into his large mansion, not as his pampered long-lost niece, but to work in the kitchen as the scullery maid. She did not get her own bedroom, just off the corner of the kitchen, where her narrow bed hid behind a threadbare curtain. There was no heat to speak of in the scullery, the small room behind the kitchen where she scrubbed the pots. As scullery maid, it was her job to make sure everything was washed and cleaned, dried and put away. There was only Mr. Obadiah upstairs in the main house, but he had at least 10 servants, so there was always stacks of plates and dishes to be washed, blackened pots and pans to scour. She finished the dishes and pulled the pots into the water. Her legs ached from standing and her knees were sore from scrubbing the kitchen floor that morning. She'd asked for a mat to lean on, for the stone tiles of the kitchen were rough, but had been cursed at by the cook. The water in the sink was beginning to cool and she wasn't allowed to add more hot water to the sink. She felt her thin body begin to shiver every time she moved. She felt the cold material of her dress rub against her bare legs. Tomorrow, she thought, she would wear those tights. She tried to imagine them on her legs now, but every time she moved, the cold came back. She tried to take her mind off it and stared through the small window in the scullery at the backyard behind the kitchen. It was dark outside, but a bright moon lit up the yard and cast strange shadows in the night. "Aren't you done yet?" She turned and saw the cook, Mrs. Maxwell, a round-faced woman with a pink scrubbed face and hard grey eyes. "Get a move on. I need you to help me fold the tablecloth." Ruth nodded and plunged her hands back into the water and scrubbed harder with the wire wool. The cook was waiting impatiently for her in the kitchen. They folded the cloth together and the cook stowed it away. "Don't forget to scrub the table. There's jam smeared in the corner where Mr. Thomas sits. Get rid of it. I don't want him getting his shirt elbows all sticky or we'll never hear the end of it." With that said, the cook turned and left the room. Ruth was alone. The kitchen was hers now, at least till just after 6 in the morning. She took a damp cloth and went over to the smeared jam where Mr. Thomas, the butler, had spilt it at supper. She took another cloth and wiped the long table and then dried it with a tea towel. Done. She felt the aches and sore spots on her body and rubbed them with her chapped hands. The stove was still cooling down, so she went and stood beside it for a few minutes, feeling a luxurious delight as the remaining heat warmed her. The house was quiet now. As she turned to her corner of the room, she allowed herself a small smile. Despite the hardships, she knew tonight she would be safe. Tonight she would not freeze to death, and tonight there would be no rats running across her body. She sat for a moment on the edge of the bed. From beneath her pillow she pulled out a book, its cover smooth soft by her rough hands. The Girl with 9 Lives by Maria Gikas, a Greek writer. Written in Greek, it was a book from Mr. Obadiah's library. He had allowed her to borrow 1 book a month from his extensive collection. Ruth saw that Mr. Obadiah was not entirely surprised when she took The Girl with 9 Lives. He probably remembered her ability with languages. The book was not Obadiah's, but had come to the library as part of his brother's collection. She had seen it many years before, when it belonged to her Uncle Joshua. Ruth was the only one in the house who could read Greek. The book was her world to escape to, a place where only she could go. The best part of Ruth's day was always this moment, after work and before sleep. The room was warm, the bed soft enough, there was peace, and she could lie there beneath her blanket and savour the moment. There, in those fleeting moments before exhaustion took her to her troubling dreams, was a time that was hers. She was safe, warm, and fed. Some nights there was an added bonus. Sometimes she could hear the piano being played upstairs. She heard it only faintly, the sound muffled by the floor above her. She knew only one person was allowed to play the instrument. At first, she could not believe that he, of all people, would be able to play such gentle pieces. But who else could it be? She lay there in the darkness, just the glow from the dying embers in the stove lighting the room. There was not a single sound till she heard him shuffle across the floor and sit on the piano bench. For a long time there was silence, and she thought he would not play, but just as sleep was about to capture her, he touched the first note. It was a piece she had never heard before, an adagio. The beauty of the next few minutes was more than anything she had experienced in a very long time.